in the classroom.
Over the weekend, you would like to think that some people did their level best to try not to lean into the worst instincts that they might have, and yet the staff there, I guess at the higher level, the superintendent certainly, Israel Vela, decided, no, I'm going to lean into the worst after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They put out a jaw-dropping statement explaining why the district refused to fly their flags at half-staff in honor of Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated because he decided to debate on college campuses. And it's one of those examples where the district is telling you precisely who they are as people. And it is so incredibly disappointing. The superintendent, via the district in this statement, said that Washington law only requires displaying the flag during school hours and doesn't mandate half-staff for any particular instance. And then it got really ideological. And of course, they don't name Charlie Kirk specifically because they're too cowardly to, or they're too petty to. But they said that when a person's public statements, quote, conflict with the values of inclusivity, respect, and student safety, the district, quote, may choose not to fly the flag at half-staff. So in other words, if we don't like your conservative views, your life doesn't merit the same public mourning. If we disagree with where you stand politically, we're going to ignore orders, not just from the federal government. The federal government order via President Trump would not apply here. But there was an order from the governor. The decision by the Kent School District is obscene. And I would argue it's the worst possible message to send to students. And I'm assuming many of which actually liked Charlie Kirk. But maybe in other instances, didn't like him or didn't really even know who he was, but saw the images of a man being assassinated while trying to have civil debates on a college campus. Nonviolence is what he preached. And those images, I have to imagine, are deeply traumatic or traumatizing to the individuals who didn't know him as much as it is to the people who did. Now, it's certainly true under the RCW, and they include that in the statement, it doesn't require a school to force half-staff observances in every single case. That's true. But this is not a story about a compliance exercise. This is a story about a moral exercise. When political violence takes a life, I would argue that the civic instinct should be unity, right? It should be to bring everyone together. It shouldn't be a values test. And that's what it became at the Kent School District. Schools are supposed to model the difference. Instead, they modeled the grievance. This statement by the Kent School District that we have online at seattlered.com. It reduces half-staff observances to what I think we can just simply call an ideological purity test, that you get reverence only if your speech happens to align with district policies as defined by the superintendent who happens to be in charge at the moment. That is a chilling standard for a public school system. It's a ridiculous standard. One designed to be weaponized. Does anyone reasonably think, that had the target been a progressive activist, a progressive speaker, that the Kent School District would reach for some legal technicality to explain why they're not going to fly the flag at half-mast? Of course not. Do you think they would bring out that values litmus test? Of course not. It would do what decent institutions do in the face of a political murder, which is lower the flags, condemn the violence without any qualification whatsoever. And that includes not having to start with, I might have disagreed with him on everything, but you don't have to say that first part. You don't have to say that first part. As the nation plans memorials, continue to have memorials over the weekend through this week into the memorial on Sunday in Phoenix for Charlie, Kent decided to preen. That's what they decided to do under the petty leadership of their superintendent, Israel Vela. The rationale that they use mangles the very concepts that it claims to defend. Inclusivity. What? Inclusivity cannot mean excluding the dead because you disagreed with them politically. That's not inclusivity. And my experience has been institutions that brag about how inclusive they are almost always the opposite. Almost always. You can't say you value respect. It can't be conditional on speech codes. It can't be conditional on political agreement. Respect? What respect at the Kent School District? Now, they say they stand for student safety, and apparently Charlie was in the way of that. Really? Charlie was the victim of a campus that wasn't safe enough. Student safety isn't advanced by telling kids that if someone expresses positions you personally find to be unpopular, that their killing is somehow less worthy of civic mourning. That's not how this works. That's not safety. That's a soft endorsement of a culture war that treats opponents as subhuman. This moment demanded moral clarity, and yet we got none from the Kent School District. And that just sends such a horrific message to these kids who are watching, who know. Because on the one hand, you might be deeply offending students who look at this and say, wow, I see how you feel about me as a conservative. Or in other cases, you might be amplifying the feelings of students who think this kind of response is acceptable. You're doubling down for them on some truly horrific actions and selfish, petty ones. A prominent public figure was assassinated at a campus event. The appropriate response would have been really simple. You just lower the flags. And that you teach students that in this country, we meet bad ideas, if you believe them to be bad ideas, with better arguments instead of bullets. But instead, the Kent School District taught students that government officials can weaponize symbols of unity, all to punish speech that they just simply don't like. It's petty, it's divisive, it's dangerous, and apparently it's what the Kent School District stands for. And some people have said, if I had kids, I would pull them out of that district. I don't think that that's particularly helpful because it's not so easy to just pull kids out of a district. But I do hope, to the extent if you do have kids in this district or any other district that maybe is leaning into this kind of response or has teachers who are celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, in which we've got plenty of those examples that we'll be outing, as I said, both today and throughout the week. If you're in a position of power, of authority over the vulnerable, yeah, we're calling you out. Oh, it's cancel culture. No, it's not. That's not what cancel culture is. But you've got this opportunity to do the right thing, and you know that the school that you might send your kid to isn't, so just take note. If anything, express yourself if you feel that could be beneficial. Tell the district or your teacher, whatever it is, that you find their behavior to be reprehensible if you think that's going to serve the greater good. And in most cases, I think it can. But just be aware, because these are things, these are decisions, these are statements that they make in the open. Imagine all the stuff that they're not doing in the open that's happening in front of your kid who might be none the wiser as to what's going on. There have been some instances, especially out of the Battleground School District, and again, I'm going to do some more deep diving before we dive too far into it. I've got audio of a teacher just going off on Republicans that was taken by a student who didn't catch this part on tape, but said that the teacher called Charlie a Nazi who basically deserved to be assassinated. This is happening in classrooms, and you have no clue what's going on unless your kid happens to tell you. And so now that you know the way the Kent School District thinks, or at least the superintendent, you can better inform your kid how they're supposed to go about their day and either take literal notes of what's going on, mental notes if they need to, or maybe they're recording things that shouldn't be done so that we can out this kind of stuff and stop this kind of abuse. Not because I want to see people lose their jobs, although I'm not going to cry over someone losing their jobs for celebrating the political assassination of someone they just didn't like and saw as subhuman. But I'd like to see some change, and we desperately need change, desperately need it. We learned some more information over the weekend, and we continue to get more information on Tyler Robinson, the suspect in this murder, in this assassination. And we know that the FBI is investigating the possibility that others either knew about this and either helped or knew about this and didn't say anything. We got a report from the Washington Post today that indicated on the Discord channel that he was on. Discord is just an online gaming platform. It's not exclusively gaming, but a lot of it is about gaming. But it's kind of like social media, and he apparently confessed to the murder. We do know now, courtesy of Dan Bongino, the deputy director of the FBI, who was on Fox News earlier today, that Tyler Robinson expressed the desire to kill Charlie Kirk.
There appear to have been multiple warning signs. You just laid out some of them. There were people in his network, friends and family, who had stated that he had become more political, that he had become at some parts, I believe some of his coworkers had stated that he had kind of detached himself when the topic of politics came up and walked away from them. Family members said he'd become more political, leading us to believe that this ideology had infected him and had taken over. And he was just intent, it appears, from the data we've accumulated and the channel and that note, which we have some evidence may have existed before based on the communications in that channel, that his target was obviously going to be Charlie and that people knew in advance. The question is, again, I just want to go back to what you had asked before. Did they know? Were they sure of this? Or did they hear this and just write it off? That's what we're going to have to find out. And that's what we're investigating now.
And how direct was the language that was used? It's one thing to speak in hyperbole or sort of, you know, in a way that doesn't indicate that you are a direct threat, but maybe it's just still a little disconcerting, versus what the reporting is, the transcript is of his commentary, at least according to the Washington Post. They're saying after the shooting, he was pretty direct. He said, quote, "Hey guys, I have bad news for you all. It was me at UVU yesterday. I'm sorry for all of this." Now, the message was sent Thursday night, 2 hours before officials said that he had been taken into police custody. So it's possible that he made this comment right before confessing to his family. Maybe maybe the confession part happened after he spoke with his family. I don't know. But a member of the group chat shared an image of the conversation with the Washington Post and confirmed that it came from Robinson's account. Who knew what, why, where, when, all that? We're still having to figure that out. And it's certainly based at least on the second press conference from the governor, Spencer Cox of Utah. It certainly sounded like he thought someone was going to help, specifically with the firearm and retrieving it. That's what it sounded like to me. And so I'm not going to be shocked if we learn more of those details. Another detail that we learned over the weekend is that he was in a romantic relationship with a transgender female, or a biological male who was starting the transition to female. We're told that this individual, the roommate, is fully cooperating with police, was shocked to learn of all of this. There's, I think a reasonable person could question whether or not there was some kind of, in this context, a need to quote unquote defend his love by going after Charlie Kirk, who obviously spoke out against gender extremism. But Fox News had confirmed this over the weekend. The roommate also said that he, quotes, hates conservatives and Christians, or at least, excuse me, one of the relatives said that. Now, don't know who the relative is, don't know the extent of the relationship. But I was on with our sister station and the Jake and Spike show, and Spike was pointing out that he had heard that he's actually the assassin, alleged assassin, is a how do you say, Groyper, a Nick Fuentes fan, which maybe, I guess, but that obviously conflicts with what we're hearing from family. There are some people, I think, in good faith, and Spike is one of them, I think, or he's a really great actor, but I think he's doing this in earnesty. There's some people who are wondering whether or not this was a conservative who targeted Charlie Kirk, because they're curious about who this person actually was. But I think there's a lot of folks on the left, particularly in media, but not exclusively, who in bad faith want you to think that this guy was from the right, because then they can say, see, it's Trump's fault, or see, it's not us. We don't commit these kinds of crimes. They don't want that to be the answer for the right reasons. The right reason for any of this is just so we know what happened and why, and see, if anything, what we could do to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, or to prevent the, I don't know, if you want to frame it as the radicalizing of youth because of social media, whatever it happens to be. That's why I want the answers. To me, it doesn't matter what his political positions are. I just know that he targeted Charlie Kirk, and I have to assume it was over at least some positions that Charlie took. And it doesn't matter if this was like a groper from Nick Fuentes' camp, who, for those of you who don't know, Nick Fuentes is a white supremacist extremist on the right. And almost to the point of parody, where you even wonder if he's like a real person or putting on a character. But he's unfortunately on the right. He's not mainstreamed by any stretch. But there are people who want him to be perceived as mainstream so they can use this as an opportunity to paint a broad brush about all conservatives. The way, sure, there are some people, I think, painting a broad brush about all liberals after this. Not on this show. The radical left is language I use intentionally. I mean, that's the subtitle of my book is The Radical Left. That's part of it, not the left. Because I've said on the show many times that I disagree with liberals, right? Just as a default position generally on issues. They're liberals, I'm conservative, right? But I at least think they want the same end goal. They just disagree on maybe how to get there. For the most part, that's how I view the vast majority of just normal Democrats. The radical left is something completely different. They are chaos agents. They are dangerous and violent. I think some mainstream Democrats, quote unquote mainstream Democrats, can have some dangerous ideas, sure, but I generally think that we just disagree on something. On the radical left, no. They are not being painted with a broad brush. They're violent, they're dangerous, and they're bad for this country and for our culture, and they have to be called out. The mere notion that even Fox News reported about and it wasn't just Fox, I think Wall Street Journal had, I think even the Washington Post had it. CNN eventually had it as well, this relationship with a trans person, which obviously can point at least a little bit to a potential motive. Not saying it's the motive, but it's obviously wouldn't be considered a shock if that's what we find out. But they had over on CNN, it was Boris Sanchez was interviewing Donnell Harvin. He's a former chief of Homeland Security. And I just want you to listen on this very topic, how the conversation was framed and tackled.
I wonder what you make of the reporting that the suspect was carrying on a romantic relationship with a roommate who happens to be transgender, and how that is now being spun to suggest that that has something to do with this. At this point, it's unclear that it does, but how do investigators determine that?
Oh, the first thing I want to be on record saying is that I think that's not only helpful for the investigation to put that out, but it's not really helpful for the tone and tenor of the radicalization of our country right now. We've seen time and time again over the last year how people of the trans community have been blamed for a whole host of things. And so
trans people have been blamed for a whole host of things? No, that's just factually inaccurate. In fact, the opposite might be more true. that so-called quote-unquote cisgendered people are being attacked as bigoted simply for saying very clearly that boys should compete against boys and girls compete against girls, or that gender is not in fact fluid. That's not an attack on trans individuals. It might be an attack on gender extremism or an ideology. I'll grant you that. It's certainly a criticism. But even bringing up the possible motive here, the immediate position, the default position of Donnell Harvin is to say, whoa, I don't, that we should probably downplay that because we don't want this to become an issue about trans people. Well, what if it is an issue about trans people? Why shouldn't we have that conversation? If this was an issue about white supremacy, wouldn't you immediately lean into that and be screaming about it? They would do that in a heartbeat. They would do it in a heartbeat. But when it is counterproductive to a political goal, or if it conflicts with some sort of position, man, they just don't want to talk about it. There was that mass shooting that was committed by a trans person who had a pretty large document explaining everything. And weird how that just kind of went away, didn't it? You recall getting that manifesto? Was that released?
No.
That's weird how that is. Why? Because it said what we know it said. Trans person who hated, in that case, it was Christians. So it's a key piece of this conversation. And so I don't know why we would be trying to downplay it. It's just, I do know.